Just to let you know,
Masal al-Khair, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to Salam House and the Humanitarian Dialogue Foundation. Just a housekeeping point before I start. There are lots of empty seats in the front, so if you don't mind to shuffle forward as much as possible, because we are expecting more latecomers as the Iraqi attitude requires. Yeah, please. Okay. Another housekeeping point, please switch off your mobile phones or put them in flight mode, otherwise the pilot. Your questions and comments will be greatly appreciated at the end of the presentation. Our friend Ahmed Dijeli, Salam House was honored to host a presentation on the groundbreaking archaeological project in south of Iraq. The Ur Region Archaeological Project, headed by archaeologists mainly from the University of Manchester, has attracted a wide local and international interest on several levels. To emphasize its importance, one must look at the bigger picture to put this project in its appropriate context. Ur witnessed its first archaeological expeditions in 1930s, and no significant work has been done there for at least 30 or 40 years. Peace and security in Iraq were very scarce, perhaps since records began. The death toll in Iraq, at least since 2003, is in the region of 157,000 or more. Corruption dominates the outlook of governance, where Iraq remains in the bottom 6 countries on the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index for 2014. The scene, of course, only gets grimmer. One thought that the looting of the Iraqi Museum in 2003 is horrific, until the shocking savagery by the Islamic State against the humanity in all its forms. After Mosul, today ISIS are closing on Palmyra in Syria. However, last year in this very room, our speaker for tonight said, take any archaeologist to Iraq and they think they are in heaven. They don't care about heat, flies, security, or anything. They just couldn't believe what they saw. Dr. Jane Moon is a co-director of the Ur Region Archaeological Project and an honorary research fellow at the University of Manchester. After earning her MA in Archaeology and Anthropology from Cambridge, she joined the Archaeological Project in Abu Salabikh in 1976 and stayed there for 10 years, during which she worked and traveled to different parts of Iraq. She earned her PhD from the University of Birmingham and spent another decade or more of her life working on the London-Bahrain archaeological expedition, followed by a long career of research, management, and archaeology. In the year 2000, Dr. Jane Moon received an OBE, Officer of the Order of the British Empire, for her services in archaeology overseas. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I present to you Dr. Jane Moon.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. Can you hear me? Yeah. Is that good? Is that even better? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ahmed, for your kindness.
We're about to fall off this.
Okay, I'm not important.
No, please come a little closer. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, and general lovers of Iraq, it's a great honour to be back here for the second time to talk about our project in the Ur region. As I was saying to Ahmed Dijeli just now, not many places asked me back a second time, so thank you especially for that. And thank you particularly to Ahmed, both Ahmeds, and to Salam House generally for your kindness in inviting me. What I'm going to do this evening, if you will agree. I'm just going to explain briefly what we're trying to do with this project, what we've found, especially what we've found since the last time I spoke to you, and what happens next, inshallah. I know some of you were here last time round, and Ahmed has very kindly given us a quick summary, but I will recap very quickly for those of you who are here for the first time, and for those of you who, like me, find their memories are no longer 100%. What we're talking about here is southern Iraq, Babylonia as it used to be known, and we're talking about the time round about 1500 BC. Now this isn't the time of the beginning of civilization. Of course, you know that is much older. That started around 3000 BC in the very south, down in this region here. And then, if I fast forward very quickly, around about 2000 BC, there was a great economic collapse. The city of Ur was sacked, and I'm summarising very fast here, so forgive the lack of detail. The heirs to the great Sumerian culture were in fact the Babylonians. These were people who spoke a very different language, who spoke a language that's related to modern Arabic and modern Hebrew and modern Aramaic. The city-states which formed Sumer continued to exist, most of them. You see some of them there: Uruk, Larsa, Girsu, Lagash, Eridu. But there's one new one, Babylon. That was under the control of a man we know as Hammurabi the lawmaker, and the king of Babylon managed to get all the cities to follow him. He famously said, "No king is strong by himself." He was strong because he got all the city-states to follow him. The first big empire, perhaps. It didn't last. It had quite a short duration, and under his successors, it gradually fell apart. Under his son, the cities of the south rebelled. This may sound faintly familiar to you. And the rebellion was put down with horrible ferocity, so that by the time Babylon itself fell to invaders in 1595 BC, this area was supposed to be completely depopulated, or if not depopulated with no people, de-urbanized, shall we say, without a real city culture. That's the accepted version of the history of this part of the world. But as you will see from what I'm about to say, I think we have to question that. The place we are working is called Tel Khaiber. No, I don't know what that means or why it's called Tel Khaiber, but it is. And it's about 20 kilometres to the northwest of Ur. Now, Ur is the city you've all heard about, of course. This is sunset at Ur, and I am privileged to see that every night, unless it's raining, because our house is only a couple of 100 metres from there. Fantastic place. And I expect you're probably familiar with many of the things that were found at Ur in the 1920s and 30s. I like to show them because when people think of treasure, that's the sort of thing they think of. Things made of gold and lapis. The lapis comes from Afghanistan, still does. It was traded all the way from Afghanistan. These came from tombs which date to around 2300 BC. This is Sumerian culture, and this is not what I'm going to be talking about tonight, but I thought we might as well see something pretty before we get started, because the kind of treasure I'm going to talk about doesn't glitter like this, but it's treasure nonetheless. Last year I probably bored you with a picture of Sir Leonard Woolley, the excavator of Ur. His deputy, Sir Max Mallowan, was married to Agatha Christie, the crime novelist, the well-known crime novelist, who wrote some of her books actually at Ur, including the famous Murder in Mesopotamia. It's not a great book, but we enjoy it because it's about an archaeological team, possibly based at Ur, who didn't get on very well and murdered each other. So far this hasn't happened to our team, just for fun, we decided to recreate the photograph because the ruins of Leonard Woolley and Max Mallow and Agatha Christie's house is still there. You can see it just in the background there. So these are the three, my co-directors. I obviously am being Agatha Christie there. On that side is Professor Stuart Campbell from Manchester, and this one is my husband, Robert Killick. Neither of them have been knighted yet. Now, the area around Ur may look very nasty and sandy and deserty now, but it wasn't always like that. And in the period I'm speaking about, it certainly would have been, if not exactly surrounded by water, it would have been very marshy indeed. So when we think about Babylonia at this time, we need to think not of a desert, but of a place connected by canals, and a place with a lot of marshland resources. They didn't have water buffalo. You see the Jarmus here, they're there now, but this was taken earlier this year. It's not back in the 70s. The marshes, thank God, are very much alive and well in the Jebalish region anyway. But they did have little reed houses, just like that, like the ones you can see, and they did have fishing and wild fowling and that sort of thing. So when you think of Ur, please think of it as a sort of an economy that had water as part of it. And also, because the head of the Gulf was further north, Ur was effectively the seaport, the kind of Basra of ancient times. Tel Khaiber, where we're working, I'm afraid is not as spectacular as Ur. It certainly doesn't have a ziggurat. In fact, it's only a couple of meters high. But nevertheless, it conceals a very important settlement. The settlement's about 4 to 5 hectares in all. And the bit we're particularly interested in is the Babylonian building, a great big building that dominates the whole place. It's about 50 metres by 30. I like to say it's the size of a football pitch. I'm allowed to say this because I'm not a football fan. I don't know how big a football pitch is, but I've discovered that actually they can be different sizes. So it's around the size of a football pitch. What is a building the size of a football pitch doing in a place that is supposed to be depopulated and de-urbanised? Very good question. Now, last year I think I showed you this satellite photograph. I always apologise for this when I show it to non-university audiences. When I show it to university audiences, this is the bit where they all wake up and look, because this is what they find exciting. I'm sorry about all these car tracks. That's the Americans in 1993 with a Humvee. If you go to a site in a Humvee, please get out and walk. Don't drive over the site, because that's what happens. But you see a big building in 2 parts. There's one part here and another part added on. And this is the last thing I'm going to repeat from last year. At the end of my last talk, I showed you that we had managed to prove that the building really did exist under the ground, and we've managed to map these parts of it. Well, I'm glad to say we've done a bit better, and now, oh sorry, I did also show you a picture of the looted temple at Umma, and we thought there was a kind of similarity perhaps between that and the building we were looking at. Well, we're completely wrong about that. What we found is not a temple at all. That's the plan now. I will stop showing building plans presently, but it's the building that's exciting. Are there any architects here? Yes, great. So one person at least understands the plan. What we found is the building, as I said, is in 2 parts. This part was built first, and the walls are 3 meters thick. This is not a flimsy, this is not a cricket pavilion. The walls are 3 meters thick, and they have these strange additions all the way around. Sorry, am I standing in the way?
Can you use the mic?
Yeah, will do. I'll sit down. Stop getting excited. It has these strange little square rooms all the way around. After a while, we don't know how long, they decided that this was too small, and they added another bit on to the north, of the same general shape. This part wasn't completely empty like this, it's just we haven't managed to excavate it yet. This southern part, we have managed to recover the whole plan of, so that is what the building really looked like at that end. What happens in the northern bit? We'll have to find out next time. Now, what all these strange bits around the edge were, well, I've had people suggest they're defensive towers, but I don't think I'd want to be defended in any building with towers like that, because all your enemy has to do is creep in between them, and then you can't be seen. So I don't think they're towers. We do find things in them. We find them full of pottery, but that could have fallen in afterwards when they were ruined. So it's still a bit of a puzzle, and if any real architect or any would-be architect would like to help me out here.
Can I ask how high these walls were? The 3 meter thick wall, any idea?
I wish we knew. Unfortunately,
But
we only found...
It could be that these rooms are done to reduce the span of the wall, which is very high.
That's a possibility, yes. Thank you. No, we don't know the original height, but we imagine they didn't build a wall 3 meters wide to make it only 2 meters high. We imagine it was very tall. Whether these square bits went all the way up is another thing we don't really know. What we do notice is that there is only one entrance, and it's a very narrow one. This bit we're not too sure of yet, but this is absolutely real. It's only 1 meter wide. In fact, the workman who was excavating it is almost 1 meter wide himself, bless him, and he had quite a lot of trouble getting through. So, whatever it was for, they obviously didn't want visitors who didn't telephone in advance, shall we say, or possibly they didn't want the people inside leaving for tea breaks without getting permission. It's not a place of open access, it's not a welcoming place. In the north part, we thought we possibly had a range of storerooms. Looks like a range of storerooms, doesn't it? And possibly another range there in the middle. But they don't seem to be storerooms when we get inside. When you come in through this part, you find a little area, perhaps where the Farage hung around. There's a little bench here, perhaps where they took your name, registered you. That would be a very Iraqi thing to do. And then you come into a nice courtyard. And this is a standard mejlis. It's a standard Babylonian audience room. We haven't excavated in it yet, so I don't know what went on there yet.
Sorry, was this roof?
Presumably, apart from the courtyard.
Okay.
But I'm afraid we don't find the roof. One of our problems. We do find it, but it's collapsed inside, just to make our lives more difficult. There's a suite of rooms here, and there's another suite here, and a little complex there. This is the area we've been looking at most, and that's what I'll be showing you in a moment. There's just some other views of it. This is obviously produced by a computer. We haven't found the walls, and they wouldn't be that quite that neat. We do think, from the one of my co-directors, my husband, so I can't argue too much, thinks that the external bits were the same height as the thick wall, because otherwise the addition there just wouldn't work. And if you think about it, that does make sense. What we found in the small complex, do I need to stop? Sorry, am I too quiet?
Can everyone hear?
It's okay.
It's okay? Just wave your hands if you can't hear and I'll speak up. What we found in the administrative complex were cuneiform documents, and I don't think we can hope for a better treasure than that. We found no less than 50 of these this season. They vary in size. The ones in the big photograph, some of them are that big. They're made of unbaked clay, which makes them extremely hard to excavate. They're a real problem. They're lying in a mud brick matrix from a mud brick building that's collapsed on top of them, and they're made of mud. And they're an absolute nightmare to excavate. How looters manage to find these things and sell them, I don't know, because they are so difficult. I can only imagine that they just shovel out thousands and thousands, and the few that come out intact are the ones that find their ways to the auction rooms. I dread to think what's been lost. Now, you don't need to know Babylonian to know that that's a list. You can see that it's ruled into columns, and there are numbers down one side. And what the majority of these things are, we haven't read them all yet. Professor Eleanor Robson from UCL is in the course of doing this for us. They are mostly lists of huge quantities of barley being transferred from one person to another, being given out. Some of them are quantities of barley being sent to the palace. It just says the palace. I'm afraid we don't know which palace. Ur would be an obvious place. Lhasa perhaps would be another obvious place to have a palace. But they do mention a palace. The one at the top there is a letter, and it actually mentions some of the same people who are mentioned in the texts of distribution. All these people have nice Akkadian names, they're local people. We have one Elamite, an Iranian if you like, but otherwise they have good local names. So the idea that the invaders who destroyed Babylon, the Hittites from the north, or Elamites coming in, or Kassites who came in a bit later, though there were probably some already there, had taken over in some way, it cannot be true. These are all good Akkadian, local Babylonian names. We don't just have lists or letters, we have other things. It wasn't just a place for making lists, it was actually also a place for learning how to write. It was a scribal school. This one here in the middle is actually a practice text, and I think this is the one that has the lists of weights and measures. It was the practice, when Babylonian scribes were learning their trade, they were made to write standard lists over and over again. Writing in Sumerian on one side and in Babylonian, Akkadian on the other, because they still use Sumerian as a literary language, much like the Catholic Church used Latin until, about 50 years ago. So we have these standard lists which persist for hundreds of years, and you can recognise them, they pop up all over. This is the list, part of the list is weights and measures. We have another part of the list which is lists of ferocious wild animals. It lists a hippopotamus, a lion, a wolf. I don't suppose these people had ever seen a hippopotamus, or possibly not even a lion. But they still had to write down the words for this to practice learning the language and learning to write in cuneiform. Another list we have lists precious stones, carnelian, lapis lazuli, that kind of thing. So as our epigraphist, Professor Robson pointed out, they might live in a very dull-coloured desert surrounding, apart from the marsh, but in their heads they lived in a very exotic place. It's quite an interesting thought. Some of the tablets are quite little. That one on the bottom is only that big. We call it the post-it note. It's actually just a comment about the contents on the other side, which unfortunately is damaged, not by looters but by rodents in this case. So that, I think, is probably, in a way, our most significant discovery. Because at Khaiber, we don't just have archaeology, we have history as well, and we can put the two together. And what has happened in all the years that people have been studying the history of Babylonia is that most of the written records come from museum collections, which ultimately, I don't like to use the word looted because that's not fair. They bought these so long ago, that wasn't a concept. But they don't come from proper excavations, most of them, and we don't know where they come from. These are actually provenanced. I can tell you the exact room, I can tell you the exact level where each of these come from. So this is a really, really precious resource, and we're working on getting people to study it, people involved. It was just our luck that the very nastiest tablet of all, you can see that that one has suffered from water damage, it's not in very good state, it's just a fragment. That was the one with the year on it. Quite a few of them have dates on, but because we're talking about this very obscure period, around about 1500 BC, we know the names of the years, but we don't know which year they were talking about. But this is something I think this rather special collection of tablets will eventually sort out for us. This one we thought had a year called the Year of the Flood from the reign of Hammurabi. So that would be the 38th year of his reign, so 1755 BC. But, and this is why you should always take every invitation to speak in public. I spoke about this in a lecture in London just before we went back to Iraq in January, and a couple of Assyriologists came up to me afterwards and said, you know what, that might not be Hammurabi. That could be one of the kings of the obscure Sealand dynasty, which we don't know anything about, from the Great Dark Age between 1500 and the 13th century. So that's how we know that all these tablets belong, we think, to this age we know nothing about yet. So it becomes even more exciting. Some people said, are you disappointed it wasn't quite so old? It's 200 years later. No, no, we're really excited. Because actually we know quite a lot about Hammurabi. We don't know anything about the so-called Sealand dynasty that succeeded them. That's the room that the tablets were found in. That's our epigraphist, Professor Robson. Right in the middle of the room was this strange bin made of clay. And in that were thrown a lot of reject tablets, because the great thing about clay is you can recycle it, you can use it again. So when they'd finished with a tablet, they scrumpled it up, threw it in there, possibly there was water in it, because a lot of them seem rather wet and crumpled up, and used them again. So that's our scribal school at the moment. We found one other kind of inscription. This is quite different, not a tablet. This is actually part of an inscribed brick. They're about this big, and they're baked, so they're much easier to find. You possibly know it was the habit of the Babylonian kings to stamp bricks they put in big buildings that they commissioned, or big buildings that they restored, saying, I, the king, this, that, or the other, restored this great building for this god or that god, aren't I wonderful? And Saddam Hussein did the same when he rebuilt bits of Babylon. This inscribed brick comes from, it's inscribed with the name of King Amar-Sin, who was a king of Ur, rather a long time before our building. And if you want to ask me what it's doing there, I don't know. It's possible there's a big building underneath of this date, but I don't think so, because I think we would have found more bricks. I think it's just a mystery. Possibly someone brought it to throw at a dog or something. Anyway, it was found by Nasrallah here, who's one of the many Iraqis who works with us, and I think is probably, if I had to pick a real treasure, a real hidden treasure, Nasrallah and his family probably comprise that treasure. His grandfather worked for Sir Leonard Woolley on the original excavations in the 20s, and Nasrallah and his family still live at Ur, along with two of his brothers, and they all help us out in different ways. Nasrallah's unenviable job is to wash all the potsherds at the end of the day. We bring great baskets of pottery back from the excavation. 70,000 sherds between January and March, and Nasrallah washed every last one without a single complaint. Well, not many complaints. His great delight is when he finds something in the potsherds that shouldn't be there. And this brick inscription shouldn't have been there, but the archaeologists didn't notice it. It was covered in mud, it wasn't their fault. But he found it in the pot washing and came running along with it. We start work at about 7 and we finish at about 3. And we come back from the site to the house at Ur, and then everybody else puts their feet up. But Nasrallah will not wait till the following morning to wash the pottery. He starts straight away. So any chance I have of a rest is disrupted instantly with him coming running in. Dr. The geht harder. Quite often it isn't anything, but you never take the chance. So siestas are not a part of my life. But he and all the people like him, I'm making a serious point, he and all the people like him who help us just make all this possible. And what's wonderful is, you know, he has a real interest, a real interest. If I could just persuade him to wear the reading glasses I gave him, his interest might increase, because he's in his 40s and beginning to get long-sighted, but hey, he's not wearing them, so there we go. Now, if you want to excavate tablets, they don't come up looking like the ones I just showed you, they come up looking like that, covered in salt crystals, just ready to explode. So the important thing is to have good archaeologists and a good conservator. Do not leave home without a good conservator if you're going to Babylonia. This is ours, she's called Julia. We share her with the Italian expedition, and she's wonderful. Very pragmatic. Not a person who gets worried if you don't have the right equipment or things aren't exactly as in the laboratory. You see her using the cling film out of the kitchen. Works perfectly well. I don't know if this, I have a little video here, I don't know if it'll work for you. This, just to give you some idea what it's like trying to excavate a tablet. These are two of my archaeologists. You have to imagine everybody's fingers are crossed and everybody's holding their breath. It's not a very professional video. And don't worry if you can't hear it, because what they're saying shouldn't be repeated probably. Slowly, please. Slowly. Yes, just leave it, please. The conservator will see to it. Those are some of the more obvious treasures, perhaps. Now, we do find things that are terribly important, that come at the microscopic level. And we're trying very hard, because there's been no archaeology in this area for a couple of decades, or no, that's not fair on my Iraqi colleagues, they've been digging when they can. There are a lot of new techniques that have come along that we need to try, and we need to try and teach our Iraqi colleagues to use as well. One of these is called micromorphology. I think I've spelled it correctly. It's not as complicated as it sounds. It involves taking little metal boxes. You know when you have a light switch, if you take it off the wall, there's a little metal box behind with the electrical bits in. You can buy a very complicated piece of equipment to do this, or you can just buy the light switch boxes in the souk in Nasiriyah, and that's what we did. And you push those into the earth at the side. You draw a little arrow so you know which way's up, and you just take all of that back to the laboratory. And the Iraqi authorities have been fantastically cooperative about letting us take samples home, because although the archaeologists understand that we're not stealing things, you know, there are some ignorant people putting a lot of pressure on them not to let foreigners take anything, even though it's only earth and nobody wants it. But they've been very brave and they've pushed our cause, so we bring this home, because we can't do this, unfortunately, in Iraq. You then make the earth solid by pouring a resin onto it, and then you can slice it very, very thinly, and you can look at the slices under the microscope. And that's when you see things like these phytoliths here. These are parts of plant stems, so that we know in one of our so-called storerooms they were probably keeping cattle or horses, because these are reeds that have been put down as bedding for horses or some kind of animal. So we can see things at the microscopic level which we can't see with our own eyes. Another technique just taken at random is, these days, digital microscopes are very cheap. So our pottery student here is using this one to look at the fabric of pottery. And under the microscope, he can see just what kind of little stones are in there. And therefore, he can tell you whether the pottery has been made locally or whether it's travelled. And he can probably tell you something about the date from that, because who was mixing what with, what was being mixed with the pottery exactly changes over time. So he can look at it microscopically. And mercifully that we can do at Ur, and the microscope's cheap, so we could leave that one with our colleagues so they can try it themselves, and we'll have to replace it next year. And that's the kind of thing we're trying to do, trying to include everybody as much as possible. Another scientific technique we use, which is again really very simple, is that every block of earth that we dig, we take a sample of it and put it through water. It's called water sieving or flotation. Excuse me. Speaking of water. You see these sacks of earth. These have been collected and brought back to the house. You tip the sack of earth into this oil drum here, which is full of water. The water pump flows the water round and it makes the water bubble. So it froths over the top and it overflows and it goes through this pipe, and then we float it, we put it into all these settling tanks so it can be used again. And you buy some nylon tights, again from the souk in Nasiriyah, and put them over the end of the pipe here, so that everything that floats gets caught in the nylon stocking, or tights. And that's where we found little bits of plant material, seeds, pieces of charcoal, things that will give us carbon dates, things that will tell us what kind of plants were around. Everything that doesn't float sinks to the bottom where it's caught in a metal sieve. And then somebody gets one of our least favourite jobs, which is sorting it all out with a pair of tweezers. And when I just mentioned that that job needs doing, the place empties instantly. It's very, very tedious. But that, in sorting it out, you will find the little bones and the small pieces of flint that maybe tell you that they were chipping flint, making tools in that area. Those are lizard bones. We wouldn't have found those with the naked eye in the excavation. It has to be done like that. The reason this is important is if you don't do this, you simply find bones of big animals. If you do this, you can find, we're not looking for small bits of bone off a big animal, because that doesn't tell you anything. We're looking for the bones of the small animals, because it's the little rats and frogs and lizards that tell us about the climate and the environment. So that's what is helping us to reconstruct the economy and the way these people lived in a much more systematic way than we could in the old days, just by looking at what comes out on the shovel. This is only very preliminary, but this has told us something about the economy. That we've got over 50% identification, which is a really big percentage for this kind of work. So it's an economy based a lot on sheep and goats, a little bit on cow. The reason it says cow and cow size is that some can't absolutely be identified, but we think they're cows, they're the right size. A lot of fishing going on, and smaller quantities of other kinds of animal. This is the kind of thing that we hope will get us AHRC grant, AHRB grant, to do a much bigger study of the economy of this place in 1500 BC, so we can help prove that it wasn't deurbanized, depopulated, deserted, whatever.
Sorry, what was that acronym?
AHRB, Arts and Humanities Research Group. Or we'll go for any of the research councils, you know, we're not proud. This is the least favourite job is sorting the flotation material, and possibly next to that is the job of cleaning out the tanks afterwards. However, the youngsters made light of it. The one at the back got quite sick afterwards. Serves him right too. Clean them out, I said, not take a swim. However, we don't obviously put all the earth through water, that would take us forever. What we do on the site though is all the earth goes through a sieve, and this is a job that all the workmen can participate in. They don't have to be educated, they don't have to be especially dexterous, they can all take part in this, and they all get a chance to find something. And this is where we find the things that are not spectacular, but which tell us just a bit about human beings. Things like little clay figurines, toys, we find a lot of those. That's probably a little horse at the top. That strange thing, next one down, is glass. I bet you didn't know they had glass in 1500 BC, or they did in Iraq. But possibly it's the eye of a statue or something like that. That there is a shell, it's about that big, and you can see somebody's cut notches in it to use it as a cutting implement. Just a small piece of a domestic tool, somebody's sewing kit perhaps. A bone needle, I don't know if you can see the shine on it, but it's shiny because it's been used. You know, these are the these for me are the treasures, I think. These are the parts of everyday life that you don't find unless you go to the trouble of the sieving. Of course we find big things as well. We find a great deal of pottery. Babylonians were great potters. And we're not talking about handmade pottery here, we're talking about mass-produced, wheel-thrown pottery. And it's the shapes of these drinking cups which gives us, some of them, they made these drinking cups that won't stand up. and then they made little stands to put them in. Humans aren't very good at making life easy for themselves, are they? It's the shapes of the bases which are helping us to build our picture of the date exactly. Nobody knows much about the pottery of this period, so this is all new. So we're quite excited about these. Other things made of clay. Well, as you know, the only natural resource in southern Iraq that is in great abundance, apart from human ingenuity, is clay, mud. And they use them for all kinds of things. These little plaques, they're very crude, they're mould-made, mass-produced. They're about this big. They were probably the kind of things, I don't know, when I was in Khaiber, I noticed people buy the little turba made of clay to take home, sort of souvenir. My grandparents were great pilgrims. They used to go to Lourdes a lot, and they used to come home with little bottles of water or little rosary beads of different things. The sort of thing you would buy, perhaps, at a temple or a cult or religious centre to bring home. This man, I'm afraid my team called him the secret smoker, but he isn't. We think he is not smoking secretly. He's actually making a gesture of humility before he goes into a temple. That is what he did. And he's wearing this lovely fringed robe. This is a lady wearing another great Babylonian costume. It's made of wool and it's got flounces, fringes. And this lady, I'm afraid, is not wearing anything at all. And this is the kind of thing that brings us into some kind of clash with modern culture in very Shia, very southern Iraq. And I'm just waiting until we find, if you look in the books about Babylonian plaques, there are some that are, shall we say, a lot less fashionable than that. And I'm just hoping we don't find one when we've got school children walking around. It happened to us in Bahrain. Now, I've been talking about this gigantic administrative building. I don't want you to think we neglect the common people. We did have a quick look, it's only been a quick look so far, at some domestic buildings which were close to our big building. They're just standard Babylonian houses, a little four-room house. Actually, they're of a date just a little bit later than the administrative building as we have it. There would have been another level on top of the administrative building, which is now eroded and decayed, and that would have been the same date, I assume, as the domestic buildings. Unfortunately, they're not preserved very high. You asked me about the heights of walls. You can see they're only about so high. So I can't tell you where the doors were, which is annoying, because then we can't tell you exactly how the house worked. But this was a courtyard, and it had 3 rooms. So, not the richest of buildings, but not the poorest either. Just an ordinary person's house. Do you see the hole here? That was where they buried a member of the household. This was a habit Babylonians were in, of burying their dead under the floor of the house. And this had been buried in, we call it a double pot burial. They'd used 2 pots as the coffin, and the dead person was just placed inside 2 wide-mouthed jars, and they were pushed together. For some reason, the lady buried in this one was all scrunched up in just the 1 pot. I don't know why. You can see young Daniel here, and Aqil's on his phone. I keep telling him about this. He was supposed to be helping. He did help when he wasn't taking phone calls. The skeleton was there. It was quite badly crushed, but you can see that the lady was wearing a necklace. You can see some of the beads in that top right photograph there. And 2 pins, 2 great metal pins that were about here on her chest. And possibly they were used to suspend the necklace from. That's the entire contents of the tomb, so not a rich one, just, again, an ordinary lady. She lived to be about 30. That wasn't bad going in Babylonian times. And she was wealthy enough to wear a necklace, but it's not an especially rich one. It does have lapis, it has turquoise, it even has 1 glass bead. It has carnelian, it has agate, but it was quite badly worn. She'd obviously had it for a long time. Perhaps she was due for a new one, poor lady, when she left this life. We find other things in the domestic buildings, a lot of tools made of bone, just simple things. Needles, pointers, borers, but also weapons made of copper, solid copper. The possibly the trade route to Turkey at this time was not doing too well, what with all the uncertainty in the country. We know what it's like when the north falls into the wrong hands. The trade routes to Turkey weren't good, so they weren't getting the tin they needed to mix with the copper to make bronze tools. These are in fact almost pure copper. Some things you find that just warm your heart. This is a rattle, and we were lucky enough to have a visitor of the right age to demonstrate it. It rattles. It's made of clay, it's about that big. We took it along to Nasriya Hospital, which I don't desperately recommend for medical purposes just at the moment. I do hope it gets better. But they do have an X-ray machine, and they did X-ray it for us, and we can see little pellets of clay probably inside, which were making it rattle. These are the kind of things that I suppose warm your heart. Well, they do mine. They bring us closer to the Babylonians. Towards the, as I'm sure I've made clear, everything we find goes to the Iraq Museum. We had our own little exhibition there at the end of our digging season in March. That's me showing off the rattle to the new minister. We have a new minister for antiquities and tourism who is much more engaged with what we do. He's a local lad. He comes from Badhab, which is quite near to where we are, and very supportive of what we do, and we had quite an enthusiastic audience. It wasn't a great exhibition, it wouldn't hold up at the British Museum, I'm sure, but it was worth everything to us. Branching out a little bit, I did say I'd tell you what we're going to try and do next, apart from, of course, we want to go back to Tel Khaiber next year, if we can find the money, and carry on. But we also went over to visit the University of Fiqh in Nasiriyah. They are starting a new archaeology course, and they want to take their first intake in October. And they want us to help with some materials, books, course materials. And the University of Manchester has some very good online materials that they could use if we could get help with the translation and so on. And we're trying to persuade, at the moment, the British Embassy they need to help us with this and help us to resource this work. We would like them to have, you know, they've got the best archaeology in the world, we'd like them to have the best archaeology course to go with it. While we were in Iraq this year, between January and March, of course, all these terrible events were happening in the north. I got very fed up with phone calls from journalists asking if I would care to say how I felt about what was going on in the north. I don't think I swore at any of them until I turned the phone off, but I was very tempted. How do they think we feel? We try not to get involved in politics of any kind. Oh, the other question that annoys me is, what are we doing about it as archaeologists? Yes, I'm raising a private army. No, what we can do about it, there is one thing we can do, and that is carry on with the research and not let them stop us. The real treasure is not the beautiful things they've destroyed, though that, of course, is tremendously regrettable. In case you're in any doubt about how I feel about it, it's terrible. But in a way, the real treasure is the information. And what we can do is go on producing more information. We can tell people about this fantastic civilization. We can perhaps do just a tiny bit to help to connect people like this who want to know more about their heritage and want to use it as a unifying force. We try not to get involved in politics, but I did find myself dragged along to one anti-ISIS rally. I didn't say very much. Amir Doshi, my friend here, who translates for me, just translates it into whatever he thinks I should have said, which is an arrangement that suits both of us very well. This is by ways, I think most of you can read the Arabic. It's the Writers Association of Nasiriyah and the Artists Association of Nasiriyah, out on the square, getting hot. And we just made a lot of noise for a couple of hours. Why not? But that's quite enough photographs of me. This is the rest of my team, or some of the rest of my team, Iraqi, British, and everything else. One of our standing jokes is they keep calling us Il-Inglesin. Actually, I think only I and my husband are, as far as we know, really English. Everybody else is Scottish, Welsh, Chinese, Canadian, German, Swedish. We are truly British. We're just a bit of everything. That's some of us. And the people I really should mention are the people who provide the money, without which we can't do anything. And we need to find some more of them, ideally before next January, ideally a bit before next January, so that we can plan. But I'm sure there's many things perhaps you would like me to talk about, or you would like to ask me. I hope there are. So at this point, I will just say thank you so much for your attention. Shukran jazilan. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moon, for this really, really moving presentation. I don't think anyone could have done it any better. Now we open the floor for questions, so take it. Amit?
Thank you very much for a very interesting lecture. You certainly kept me awake the whole time.
Don't do that.
What I'd like to know is the information that you're getting. Does that get fed to the British Museum? Is there any connection in that aspect?
Yes. With the British Museum, what we do with the information is, I've got some leaflets I should pass out. What we want to do, we record everything digitally. That's another thing I can talk about is our digital recording system, but you would possibly be the only person awake if I did that. We want to put all the information online so that everybody can read it. We have it all integrated into a geographical information system. So what I can do on my computer is I can get up a plan of the building, click on any place, and it will show me what was found there, photographs of it, what it measured, what the analysis of it was. But what we're working towards is being able to put that actually out online so that anybody can use it. No, yes, I suppose you could say we feed the information to the British Museum. We try and publish it to anyone who's interested. But we want it to be for everybody, not just academic articles.
Yeah, I should mention for everyone in the room, I would urge you to check the website for the Ur Region Archaeology Project, because you will find there are updates and reports on all the findings in Arabic and English. There are lots of useful videos, and if you're on Facebook, on social media, Jane is incredibly active on social media, on Twitter and Facebook. So the Facebook page of Khaiber has all the updates up to date. Anything that's been published on Khaiber and their work in Arabic and English or any other news outlet, you would find it on that Facebook page.
Yes, thank you. Great lecture. 2 questions. Those chambers around the building, I didn't see any access to those chambers. Yes. Now, you mentioned animals being kept there. Did I understand that correctly? Is that where you found?
No, the animals were being kept in what we thought were the stores.
So it's not in those chambers.
This is a very important point. We are trying to find the access points. Because the walls in the bits we've looked at so far are preserved above threshold level, we don't see any doorways. But I think we found, should I take the time to go back to the... I'd like to take the time to go back to the plan. It'll take me a moment. There are definitely doors in, is it in focus?
Yeah.
There are definitely doors in these ones, but then those have been reused once they were on the inside.
Yeah.
My husband is having an argument with one of our chief archaeologists about this room, but we're almost certain there's a doorway in that one. The others we need to check. If there were doorways in them, that would solve everything. We'd know they weren't towers. Another suggestion has been that they were great tall silos for grain. Grain was tipped to the top. And yeah, well, you need some way of getting it out at the bottom.
Right. The second question is slightly more possibly political. How did you find the Iraqi attitude towards heritage? Because I found it extremely difficult in terms of understanding the particularly Babylonian. They talk about it as being, you know, we had a great civilization, but do they actually preserve it? Do they actually understand it? Do they actually nurture it and maintain it?
I find the will to do so is 100%. The resources are somewhere like 1%. No, the understanding is perhaps not at a high level generally. My colleagues are well informed, my archaeologist colleagues, but
I'm talking about the public, I'm not talking
yeah,
about...
well, as you know, the education system has been in a terrible state. I have children working for me who can't read or write. When I was there in the 70s, I had old men working for me who'd sign with a thumbprint, and the little boys who'd wash the pottery would sign with a flourish, and they were very pleased with themselves. Now it's the other way around. One of the children, I didn't know he was school age, he lied to me, he told me he was older, and he was on holiday from school, but he has to work. He asked me about the cuneiform writing, and I said, well, there are lots of bookshops in Nasiriyah. I'll find something in Arabic that explains about this sort of thing, and I'll bring it for you. And one of the older men took me aside as I left and said, don't bother, Doctora, he can't read, he's never been to school. So there is an idea that there was a great civilization, but the details, not really. I keep being asked to talk about Sumerians. Amir Doshi, my translating friend, is always making me give talks to his various clubs, to the art school which he's got going again, the School of Fine Art. And I said, look, I don't know anything about art. He said, just talk about Sumerians and I'll translate and it'll be about art. Fine. I translated, I showed them pictures of Sumerian art and all the terrible things Sumerians did to each other. And I said, beautiful art, but they were not nice people. And he translated, they were very nice people. I said, come on, my Arabic's not good, but I noticed that one. No, the understanding of the history is not very good. They do try to preserve things, they really, really do. I mean, some of them risk their lives trying to stop these places being looted. And at Ur, yes, they desperately want tourists, and they try to do bits of restoration, but there's some great gaps. What can I say? I suppose the answer to your question is yes and no. I'm afraid that's not very helpful. And I start getting emotional when I talk about it. I wish we could do more for them, I really do. But the will is there, it really is.
We'll take another question, Rashad.
I was wondering about that same thing of access, because a lot of the buildings that we have, main buildings like Mustansariya or mosques, etc., always are surrounded by kushuks, like market places or scribes or something like that that actually uses is an access for people visiting these places. So could it be some kind of interface, shops, etc. Interface.
It's a possibility. Yes, people have suggested it could be shops. They just look a bit. I don't know. Yes, it's possible. They look a bit regular. You get a souk. It never looks quite that neat. This has been very well laid out, and they have brick pavements at the bottom. But yes, it could be something like that. Also, between them, there is plaster. They've plastered the area, so it's been kept clean for something.
Or tax,
I think taxation, I think you're getting very close there. I would not be at all surprised if when we finished reading the tablets we discovered this is some giant taxation system. I hope not, but I fear it might be.
Yes.
Know where to look and don't tell them. I mean, they can destroy the very visible things.
So like there's still a possibility that in the future they go back and...
I don't take this the wrong way, but probably for an archaeologist, you can actually get at things we would never have got at before, under Nebi Yunus, for instance. Not that I would have had that happen for anything. But no, it's the information we're after, and we'll still find it. They'll never stop that. It's the beautiful things, unfortunately, but there are plenty more. We will find more.
So my other question was, do you do any exhibitions in like London or the UK, I think?
No one's asked us to put on an exhibition in London yet.
Can you?
Well, all the objects are in Iraq, obviously, but we could do things with experimenting with 3D photographs and laser models and so on. So I hope we will be able to display what we've found in a very real sense without actually transporting objects, because that just gets everybody upset. But yes, I hope we'll be able to.
أنا راح أحكي بالعربي، بعذر إنجليزيتي شوية سيئة ويعني راح أزحمك وترجم لي. عندي كمان سؤالين. السؤال الأول هي كم زيارة قامت بها للعراق ومن في أي سنة بدأت بها يعني التنقيب عن الآثار بالعراق، وهل تتخيل إنه هي يعني اكتشفوا ما فيه الكفاية من الحضارة البابلية، وإلى جانب من نظرتها كأثرية لماذا تختص الحضارة البابلية عن غيرها من الحضارات؟ هي وجهة نظرها. سؤالي الثاني
هذا كله كان سؤال واحد.
سؤال واحد والصحفي شوي يصير مخادع. سؤالي هو الأهم. أنا حاورت قبل عدة سنوات أحد الأثريين في دار كريستيز للأعمال الفنية، فقال أغلب الدور المزادات تعاني من ندرة الأعمال الفنية الممتازة الأثرية، وهم يتقبلون الآثار المنهوبة، خصوصاً إذا هم ما يعرفون إنه هي منهوبة وجاية قادمة من بلد ثالث، يعني مش من المصدر. فإلى أي مدى معرفتها بالقوانين الجديدة اللي تحكم هذه الدور اللي تعرض آثار منهوبة؟ المزادات.
So basically we have a...
هل أكو قوانين جديدة؟
Yeah. Well, it appears to be two questions. The first question is quite stratified. So the first question is how many visits you had to Iraq and from which year? I think we alluded to that in the introduction, but I'll allow you to say that then I'll translate it. And then, do you think that what's being excavated in Iraq is enough, is sufficient, or there's more to find? I think this is probably not the right question for an archaeologist.
It's an easy one for once.
And then, was there anything that makes the Babylonian heritage stands out from everything else you find in Iraq? So this was the first question. The second question is that it's about the auction houses in London. The lady's a journalist. She had a conversation with one of the people at Christie's, and he was informing her that they would do accept archaeological findings or any items that would come from a third-party country, so it's not from the origin country, and especially if they were in an exceptionally good quality. But she's saying that are there any changes in regulations that you're aware of, or anything that would govern your work as an archaeologist to prevent these auction houses from basically manipulating?
Okay, well, I'll start.
You can answer them in any order.
Okay. Well, the first one was how often I've been to Iraq. Well, I went in 1976, intending to spend 3 months, and ended up spending 10 years there. And that's what it does to you. And I went back in 2012 to begin this project. Essentially, we go every year for 2 months, or thereabouts. 3 months, 2 to 3 months.
Do I need to translate English to Arabic?
يعني هذه فهمتها.
I can give you all the... أقدر أعطيك كل المعلومات ورا ما نخلص. Okay. And then the other thing is what you find in Iraq, or what you found so far, sufficient?
Well, we are digging one site in Dhika. There are 1,200 known other sites in Dhika, and those are just the ones we know about, and just in Dhika.
And that's only in Dhika? 1,200?
Those are the documented ones. You always find more when you start looking. When I was digging in the Jebel Hamreen a long time ago, there was an American expedition digging about 3 miles away, and we had a problem. Our car had broken down, so I walked to them to borrow their car. And in walking just 3 miles, I found 2 more sites. And this is in an area that had been thoroughly surveyed before we even got there. So that's how it is. If you mean, do we need to dig them all? We don't. We couldn't possibly. But we do need to do more than we are doing.
And what about the Babylonian heritage? Anything that makes it stand out, in your point of view?
Babylonian heritage is part of a great continuum from Sumerian all the way through to Hellenistic. There aren't great breaks. Even when Babylon is destroyed, you find afterwards a new people came in. They called themselves Kassites, but they continued all the Babylonian cultural traditions. So it's part of a very long thing. But if you mean in what way was it special, well, it was literature, trade, all the trappings of civilization at a time when, well, you've seen Stonehenge. You can see what things were like in Western Europe at that time. It's just a very early manifestation of civilization.
Okay, and as an archaeologist, you have basically the black market and auction houses, and you have that sort of complex. What sort of governance you have on your work? I understand that everything you find ultimately goes, the physical object goes to the Iraqi Museum, and the digital archive that you have is available online and through the university. What will be? Yeah. But in general, like, you know, just for everyone around here who, if, you know, we happen to go down the pub and then we find like a tablet or something.
Well, it's hard for me to answer things about auction houses because it's something I know absolutely nothing about. When I lived in Iraq in the 70s and 80s, occasionally I would get people who should have known better, diplomats usually, and I won't say which nationality, who would say, look, I bought this. Can you tell me how old it is or how much it's worth? I'd say, no, I can't, or rather I can, but I'm certainly not going to. You know, you should be ashamed of yourself. Take it back. Usually they were fakes, which is great. We have nothing to do with the buying or selling of antiquities. We simply find them. So I'm sorry, I don't know much about. I do know that we should ratify the Hague Convention. The UK should do that.
There is actually a petition that's ongoing. It was published by the BISI yesterday. So again, I would urge anyone who has access to social media to sign up for that overdue, basically, convention to be ratified. I'll just take a question from the gentleman, then the lady.
Yes, my question regarding the date, if I understand you correctly, have you noticed a date written on the tablet, or your analysis to the geology that the date is backdated? If it is written, that opens another question. Normally the date is based on a reference point as a starting. So if it is written, what is the reference point? Is it the Great Flood or a bigger king or what?
I'm sorry, it's a little complicated and I don't think I explained it very well. We do have written dates, but okay. The one that we thought was exactly year 38 of Hammurabi turns out on further examination to be a different date and one that we can't actually place exactly. These kings had names for their years, and the ones that are well known, we know which ones these were, but these are all new. So we know they are around 1500, but we can't tell you exactly which year they are.
Yeah, but the writing itself, the written itself,
they do write the date,
yes.
Figure. Yes,
figure
it's a figure.
Should be, yeah, should be
they do write a date. We have the month and the day. Unfortunately, it's often the year that the mice have eaten. But yes, we do have some written dates, but we're also working from the material to try and put the two together.
Okay, please.
I just had rather a sinister thought about those cells, and it's only by analogy with Chatal Huyuk that they might be prison cells only accessible by retractable ladders.
Well, this idea,
I'm sure it's not original.
That for the outside, but for these ones,
yes,
we thought were storage magazines.
That worried me a bit.
Then we actually find tannours in them. The one that we've fully excavated has a tannour in. I didn't bring all the details of the excavations. So that looks like somebody was living in there. Sorry?
Would ladders work for those even?
Well, we don't need to because they've got doors.
Okay.
So it's possible. I mean, these people were always taking prisoners of war, and they did not treat them well. They put their eyes out to make so they could do repetitive work. Well, not all of them, obviously, but they kept people as prisoners and slaves, I'm afraid. So, as I said to Amir Doshi, they were not nice people.
Yeah. Okay, please.
Maybe slightly technical question. I mean, how sure can you be when you find a building like this? You're trying to work out what the use of this building might have been. Obviously, there was a lot of bureaucratic activity, perhaps, in this particular building. How sure can you be in terms of other invaders or other armies, civilizations coming on, finding this building or the ruins of this building, and then deciding it's more useful to them as perhaps a cowshed? I mean, how much does that cloud your investigation of what the building might originally have been for?
It is a consideration, because obviously we come first to the fallen-in roof, and we take that off, and then we find what people were doing with the building last. And we can certainly see patterns of reuse. In this area, for instance, at the top of the picture, we found an awful lot of net sinkers. Someone had thrown a fishing net in there. Well, I don't think that was part of the original administrative use. I think that was just somebody, a local fisherman, reusing this ruined building, place to keep his nets. But no, it doesn't cloud it, because we look at the stratigraphy very carefully. But when rooms go out of use, people don't always conveniently leave everything in the room for us to find. They tend to clear them out, and they tend to throw rubbish in. So there is, quite a lot of interpretation to do.
Okay. Well, I'm feeling generous tonight, so go ahead.
It's not so much a question, it's just a weird thought that came to me. Assuming that it was all roofed, right? Could those external box thingies, right? Could they have been like this fire and then I'll heat the inside? There was fire all around.
Can I stop you just there? I think this would be a really nice homework for all of us until next year to speculate about this, and then Jane will come up with the right answer. Because I'm thinking this could be a giant habis. They will hide the ring, habis, we hide the rings in the hands, and then I'll explain it to you. So, anyway, I have a question for you, Jane, is that in terms of how much are the locals involved in what you do, and how do you recruit them?
We work entirely through the local Al-Ghazi Sheikh, who supports what we do. We pay a guard all year round, but he's actually an elderly man of, I can't remember the Iraqi expression, but the British expression is he's one button short of the row. He's not completely all there, so it's a great job for him. He can't get a job doing anything else. He would not keep invaders away, but just the fact that he's there and that he belongs to the tribe is our security. We let the local sheikh send us workmen. We will train or teach whoever he sends us. He chooses the people he thinks need the money most. And we have a couple of skilled ones we bring from all with us as well.
So that's in terms of what about people like professional archaeologists from the university? If they wanted to work with you, what would be the arrangement, or is there such an arrangement?
There is already such an arrangement, not with the university yet, but with the State Board for Antiquities and Heritage. We have 4 of them working with us every year. I could tell you it's easy and it's wonderful. It isn't. It's really quite difficult for them and for us. We have a terrible communication problem. My Arabic, as you've already gathered, is pitiful, and their English is possibly worse. Well, it's no better anyway. A lot of patience is needed on both sides. We have very different standards, but it's Iraqi heritage we're working on, so we work together. No, we don't argue. We get frustrated, but we don't argue. We don't have a relationship with the university for excavating at the moment. I hope we'll build it. But this is one of our problems. University and State Board don't really speak, which makes life quite difficult. I'm hoping we can do something about this. There are a lot of local sensitivities.
Okay. Jane mentioned something really surprising last year. She said that in Kurdistan region there are 38 expeditions working over these 10 years, or probably more. The rest of Iraq, there are only 2 expeditions, 4 being one of them. So my question to you is why?
Partly people imagine it's dangerous. Partly people are now got involved in Kurdistan and it becomes a vicious circle. The professors are working there, so they give their students topics to work, research to work on that belong in Kurdistan, and these students grow up and start their own expeditions in things they're interested in, and this becomes the north. We have to start this cycle again. We have 1 fully funded PhD working at the moment. He's working on pottery. Also, even those who would want to come, they find their universities won't let them go. I'm very grateful to Manchester for not giving a damn about me and not caring whether I get kidnapped or not. Other universities will not let their professors go. And I'm particularly grateful for Stuart Campbell, our professor from Manchester, who takes no notice when they tell him not to go. He told them the night before he went for the first time, he just sent a note. And when they threw their hands up, he said, "Here's the risk assessment, now I must go, I've got a plane to catch." It wasn't quite like that, but it was something like that. So mostly it's perception. People don't realise you can do it.
Can I give you another reason?
Yeah, for the chamber?
Yes, for this particular aspect, why not in the south? From experience, in one of the meetings in Iraq, talking about the heritage of Najaf, which I was there and I took part in that debate. There were a lot of official people there. And one particular person, after we talked about the heritage of Najaf doesn't start with the burial of Imam Ali in Najaf. It started long before that. And his response, he was an old person from a particular group, and he said, why are we worried about that? We only, the heritage is only the cultural heritage he was talking about, rather than the building and the monuments that go with it. He was obviously referring to the religious heritage, and that is where he started from. And I think that attitude is quite widespread in the South, which stops people from...
I certainly had, when I worked at Bahrain in the 90s, I had this all the time. You know, if it's pre-Islamic, it's Jahiliyyah, it doesn't matter. But I don't get this from the Iraqis.
Well,
just a bit more broad-minded, perhaps.
Okay. Well,
yeah, anyway.
Anyway, Jane is staying here, I guess, for another 10 minutes. Can we hold you hostage?
I'm all yours.
Okay, you didn't kidnap you in Iraq, but we can do it here. So if any of you have any questions or comments, please feel free. I'm saying that on behalf of Jane. Anyway, would like to wrap up this meeting. Thank you so much for attending tonight, and please, big round of applause for Jane.
You can also get it online, it's available online as a PDF. It's an Arabic and English. I'm not sure how good the Arabic is. English is okay. Get it off the website.